Caroline, thanks for coming on today for our first podcast.
That's all right. You're most welcome.
And it is Caroline, isn't it? Because you're French, right?
Yes, I'm French from background, yes. For many, many years, I worked for many American companies and they insisted on calling me Caroline because it was spelt like Caroline. So it's quite hard for people to make the connection. But today I'd like to go back to Caroline, although it's spelt like Caroline.
I always like to listen to how people want their names pronounced. I think it's really important. So yeah, that's cool. So yeah, as I said, this is our first podcast for Flow Dialogue. Although we've got online the Autism Dialogue Conference is already up there. But you're the first interviewee, and so thanks for coming on. And yeah, you're most welcome to the the whole project.
Well, I feel honored to have been asked.
Great. And of course, I think the reason I asked you is because we'll be working together on this year's Autism Dialogue program, and we'll come to that in a bit. It's really nice. I'm just looking at where you are at the moment. I really like your room. There's lots to look at. It's really visually pleasing for me. Your jacket.
Oh, that's nice.
Lovely colours, and the fish mobile.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and lots of nice wood and light. It's good light and everything.
It's my working environment. I've had a home office now for about nearly 20 years. I set up as a freelance 20 years ago just to be a mum, Johnny. That's all I wanted to be, and the business just took off. You know, I'm a qualitative researcher from background, so I run cross-cultural work, research around the world for many years for agencies. And when my son was, I think, nearly 4, because he was going to start primary school, I just couldn't sustain, the rhythm and the level of stress already at that time, 20 years ago. So that's how I started, and working from home has become part of who I am, in many ways. So how I work and where I work is very important, because it really conditions how I think, how creatively I can think, how free I feel to think the way I need to think. So it's been extraordinary, really. I feel very blessed to have been able to do that. I think I've produced the best of my work because of the environment, I've been able to create for myself.
That's really great. And I definitely resonate with that approach. I'm just wondering if you might like to tilt your camera a bit down.
Okay.
Can you tilt it forward a little bit? Because quite a lot of room above you.
Is that better?
I think that'll be great. Excellent. Thanks.
Okay.
All right. So you gave a quick introduction about your background there. Do you want to say a little bit about the origin? We've got about 20 minutes, half an hour together. But if you want to say just a little bit more about when you started, how you see what you're doing now, how it began to emerge.
It's quite clear, really. I mean, I think it takes years to realize why you did things the way you did at the time you did. And I came from a family where there was very little communication, where it's been very hard to communicate authentically, I would say, or to have deep sharing in that sense. So I've always been driven all my life by communication. So getting into qualitative research the way I did, because I was a linguist, I'm half French, half German, and had studied Spanish at the time. So doing cross-cultural research was kind of natural, but I also was always interested in the psychology of people. So when my son was young, I did a degree in psychology with the Open University just to complement, some of the things I was finding by talking to people. Yeah. So talking to people and helping people, enabling communication among others, whether it is for marketing or research purposes, was just, came to me very naturally. It was always something I really enjoyed doing. So whether it is, whether you're talking to someone one-to-one or whether you're talking to a group, just never made any difference to me, provided that we ended up with some real good collaborative, co-creative sharing. To me, that's always been the goal. And after doing research for so many years, I retrained as a creative facilitator, I think nearly 15 years ago now. And through that, I discovered dialogue. So generative dialogue, Bohemian dialogue, there's different ways of talking about it. That's how I got into Quakerism, because their worship sharing is dialogue-based. That's how I got into training in Lego serious play, because the sharing after you construct your Lego model is in a dialogue format. Anything that was connected to dialogue then became really important to me. That's what I noticed. So it was quite natural. And I also did I did quite a lot of exploration and training around circle work in nature. That's how I would describe it. So, you know, going back to the way of counsel, the traditional and ancestral way of sitting together around the fire and sharing stories, you know, sharing our own inner wisdom, I would say, you know. Wow. So that's probably the journey that, you know, kind of the need for communication that kind of drove me to be. I think we all become experts in what we need the most to start with. You know, that's what people say, and that's really proven really to be true for me. So yes, dialogue is now probably the most important part of what I'm interested in terms of the kind of work I do today. And my ambitious, I guess it's not an ambition of mine, but it's a kind of purpose today, is to bring dialogue to the community. So it's to make dialogue accessible to everyone, not just to the professional world, as I have been doing, you know, for a while, working for large corporations, you know, for other purposes. You know, I've done, as a facilitator, I run large projects looking at visioning, looking at innovation, new services, new worlds, I would say, in general. So dialogue came in quite handy as a tool, as a process, you know, that I could experiment with all over the years. But what I found where I am now in my life today is very much bringing those amazing means, you know, to communicate and share to everyone. You know, so to make it really kind of inclusive, you know, as a way to share together. And I was involved in the launch of a film called Down to Earth last year for a period of about nearly a year, where we facilitated a piece of dialogue at the end of each screening. So for me, that was an extraordinary experience to bring dialogue to the ordinary person, not knowing every night or every time we showed the film who I was going to have in the circle or in front of me. So that was just amazing, very, very rich experience that showed me that everyone loves dialogue, you know, everyone needs dialogue. And that really is kind of confirming that my intention and my desire, you know, to bring dialogue to everyone.
Wow, that's I was going to say that was your recent career, a couple of decades in a nutshell, but it's a big nutshell, or it's a nutshell with a lot in it. And yeah, I was thinking about the acorn analogy, that the acorn actually contains the tree. It potentially contains the tree. And also I just remembered that some of our work crosses over, because I also did a couple of films locally and then had not exactly a dialogue, but like an open format discussion afterwards, you know, in the field of autism that I've been specializing in lately. Something else came up as you were talking about, I think to a lot of people probably watching or listening to this is what exactly is, what, I suppose, how, when you go into a big corporation, I think the pre-question to this is, how did you get, or sorry, who did you work for in these research areas, and at what point did you start to realize that you could offer something else to society, and then eventually these big corporations? And I suppose the second part of that is, what does that exactly mean when you go into a corporation and you work some of these quite fancy words you're using, which to be quite honest, they go over my top of my head.
Which ones?
Well, I can't even remember them, but they just sound wonderful. They're like little flowers of words that come out like your jacket, and you walk into this. I just got this picture of you walking into this big building with loads of stuffy people in ties, and you just come around and wake them up again, basically. And you're getting them to think differently and injecting life into the stale, what we perceive as quite a stagnant and alienating, society. And we could talk about that all day, but I just wondered if you could just put a little bit more light on that.
So, but one of the longest standing client I had was the Disney company. So I worked for the various types of Disney companies. Start with Disney, Walt Disney World in Florida. I think many years ago was my first biggest contract. It was a research contract. And then that took me to work for Disney UK, for Disney company, for Disneyland Paris. I did a lot of work for Disneyland Paris in particular, whereby training became necessary, you know, or coaching, even individual coaching became, you know, it was a place where people will say, oh, would you mind taking care of mentoring that person? You know, because of I guess of who I was and what I brought. And I guess the phrase you just used, waking up, is an important one. When we did visioning, for instance, we did a lot of we did a very big, large visioning project in particular. I just did dialogue circles without telling them. So that's kind of illustrate how I don't really talk about dialogue when I just get people to sit in a circle, and then I give them some specific. I suggest different principles of engagement, which are different from the way we communicate, the way we converse on a daily basis. And over the years, I kind of developed a list of things that I felt were important to mention. And so I would suggest that people would just simply listen to one another without asking questions or without commenting, just welcoming whatever people were prepared to share with them. And I would suggest that they own what they share. So it's their personal story, that it's not about society, it's not about everyone else or the department or the company, but it was coming from a place of I, you know. It's so kind of encouraging them to share from their own personal perspective.
So how would you actually get a job in Disney?
Just personal recommendations. Over the years, it was just, I never had to really pitch in that sense. You know, I just got recommended, because as a facilitator, I think you bring skills and personality that people appreciate or not. And then they know they need specific people for specific tasks. And, you know, I just came up for, I guess I always like the American style of running things, because it's very open, it's very direct. You know where you stand, you know, in the Anglo-Saxon American kind of way of dealing with business. It's very masculine too, which I was kind of used to, because I worked in the Middle East for a few years myself, and I found that you kind of, as a woman, you kind of learn to play the game of the man's games, I would say, right. Which is kind of another interesting conversation to be had about that. So it's just personal recommendations, really. Oh, you should be talking to Caroline because whatever, you know, that's just how it came. Yeah. And then the more work you did, then the more part of the family you became in many ways, right. You know?
Right. So somehow somebody in authority in the company has got a remit to bring in somebody like yourself externally. Absolutely. and inject some of this waking up.
Well, that was never the intention, but when you come as an external facilitator, is to bring neutrality. I think that's the most important.
Neutrality.
Neutrality, yes. You're not part. You don't have any interest in, you know, for your own personal career or for the success of the project. Although you know that's part of the objectives. Generally, is to make whatever is facing them successful, whatever that means at the time.
Right.
And I think what was important about me is that because I was running my own consultancy, then I invested in a lot of training over the years. So I was able to then bring tools and processes as I felt were needed. And that's how dialogue came in. I thought, I remember someone asking me to run a team building exercise between two new teams. They were all investment bankers in Luxembourg. And I remember thinking, that's where we're going to do some dialogue. And I remember being challenged by some of the guys, the men in particular, because men love to ask questions. You know, it's quite hard. I mean, it's just going to be a gross generalization between genders, but women are more likely to be open, you know, to trying different ways of being or different ways of doing things, because there is a form of control in questioning. When you ask questions, when you feel entitled to ask questions, then there's a form of power and control that takes place. So it's quite interesting. And that's where the waking up comes in, because it's making people aware of the need they have to have that control when they are relating with somebody else. So that's where it starts for me. And then I remember sitting in circle at the end of the day with those two teams that was really kind of becoming one by then.
Yeah.
And just the humility, the gratitude to have gone through that process from the people who had challenged me to start with, you know.
Yeah.
So it's quite nice to see the change, you know, in people when you take them through the process of being able to be yourself and share your own stories authentically with respect, you know, having those stories being welcomed by the rest of the team. What I find most of the time, Johnny, when I work with teams is that they never really know each other. You know, they go and get drunk in some places, you know, together in the evening. That doesn't mean that they know each other. I remember doing a project with care homes, in 3 care homes, and we brought kind of re-energized the spirit of compassion, which is the essence of care. And by the end of the training, we had this wonderful feedback after 3 months of working with them, where for the first time as a team, they'd been working together for years, some of them 10, 12 years, and they'd never actually had a personal conversation together. So bringing dialogue tools just kind of created a revolution, you know, in the way they were together. And I always find it interesting because you give them those tools or processes, but they change their lives as being. It's not just at work, so they bring them to their personal world. And I remember having from this project some wonderful feedback from women saying, "Oh, my husband said, what have you done? You know, you're amazing, and you're actually listening to me now. Like, what have you been doing at work?" So it's just fun, you know. It's just
Results.
yes, it was just fun and just so beautiful, you know. It's just so rewarding, you know, to have people saying, "Hey, that was really useful to me."
Yeah. Do you know what? Generally, there's opportunity to be more authentic and then take that into their lives.
And this is what I would describe as the little waking up moments, you know, and they are what they need to be for each individual. So, but going back to the autism dialogue, I'm very excited in getting involved. I'm very interested. I was involved in pharmaceutical research all my life. So I've been, you know, trained, you know, and I've run many sessions with patients with lots of different conditions, lots of issues, social issues as well, you know, as well as kind of, I would say, more kind of ordinary profiles of people, you know. But I always found these projects the most rewarding in terms of the potential in connecting people in ways that they've never connected before.
Yeah.
So I'm really look. I mean, I'm not personally affected. You know, I don't autism first. I don't know autism firsthand. But I did have a neighbor. I've lived in the same street for 23 years. My street is like Coronation Street, and literally. And I used to have a neighbor whose son is autistic, and my son at the time was 5 years younger than him, and they became very friendly. So I am familiar, you know, I'm familiar with what the experience of the world of autism might be, and through my studies in psychology 20 years ago, I think it's Baron Cohen, isn't it? It was really coming through as like some of the peak, you know, in terms of new research, and that was 20 years ago when I studied it, you know, where it was all talked about. It was a big chunk, you know, of what we were to look at and to study. So there's a few connections I can make, you know, with that world, but it's quite nice for me to come in as a fresh mind too. That's what I've always found, is to be called in and help with the process of creating a safe space for people to be able to explore what it feels like to be able to share in this way.
I'm going to give you one little tip here.
Okay.
Because when you said where you live is like Coronation Street, and you said literally like Coronation Street. Well, one of the classic things about autism and Asperger's, as it used to be called, is that it's taking things literally is quite a classic trait. And so I was thinking, what you actually mean? You've got the Rover's Return on the corner.
No, we don't have a pub.
Lives next door. Which one are you? And you know, it's quite interesting. You mentioned Baron Cohen as well, because I know he is an expert in his field, but he's over the years, as the neurodiversity movement, for example, has risen, and autistic people are really fighting for justice and rights, rightly so, because there's so much cruelty and discrimination. So Baron Cohen's been quite ousted by a large part of the actual autistic community. So it'll be interesting to, and you mentioned also pharmaceutical, and that's another thing which when you come and you start to learn more about the autism community, how the medical model is really, we really got to be careful about thinking in that way, because there's a lot of good intention on the scientific side with a lot of giant drug trials going on now. Some of it's well intentioned, some of it's maybe not very well intentioned.
But the pharmaceutical world has evolved a lot over the last 10 years, and I've been involved in the development of understanding the patient's journey. That taking the patient's perspective. So that's what I believe I've brought, as a facilitator, is this opening the door to the world of what it's really like to have whatever you're describing in medical terms, in scientific ways, and understanding what emotions, what experiences, what difficulties, challenges, social challenges, personal challenges it involves. And I've done that for many different fields. One of the latest ones I was involved in was for rare diseases, So even conditions that are not kind of seen as important, I would say,
or conditions that even the word condition is getting questioned by a lot of the community, and the word patient, that's another one. I think that you're going to be bringing the scientific perspective is so important, but what I can see is that you've got the cross-cultural, the openness, the bringing the compassion and everything, and I think that we're going to have some really interesting conversations when it starts in a couple of weeks.
And I'm not bringing any words, Johnny. I hope I can facilitate the generation of the words that are needed.
Okay, it's a good. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Well, yes, I think as a dialogue facilitator, I think that's something that we've come across in discussions together. Is I don't believe in mixing the process and the content. So I really see myself as being there to hold the space, make sure everyone is safe and feel okay, and following up, encouraging people, following up on what people are sharing, as opposed to bringing stuff from the outside, and certainly not bringing my own experiences or assumptions or interpretations, to that process.
Just to let the listeners know that you and I were a part of a group call yesterday in the Academy of Professional Dialogue, as the first autism dialogue to run parallel alongside the physical project, to hopefully nourish it and feed it. But what do you think is coming out of that conversation that we can take into the physical realm?
What I learned the most, to me yesterday, was the most extraordinary way of thinking of dialogue is that could we have a non-verbal dialogue? Could we go beyond words in our authentic sharing? For me, that was mind-blowing.
Can you say some more?
Well, it's just, we use words, and of course, communication is, verbal communication is based on words, and we interpret words, and the way we use words, and that's what I keep telling people, and when I run sessions, is like, we're going to use the same word with a different context, with a different interpretation. So we really need to elaborate whatever we're saying most of the time. That's why story sharing is essential in many ways, to have the opportunity to really share stories, as opposed to have an exchange of phrases that then get reinterpreted and get questioned each time. This is what happens with the questioning in normal conversations, is that we keep questioning, do you mean this, or do you mean that, or so we get provoked, by some of the words that people use. So how might we, share beyond words? So I've using visuals, using arts, using the body, how can we embody? how we feel and experience? Can we express it, through movement, through the arts in some form? I don't know, because it's just happened yesterday, but it really kind of triggered a lot of, it was a great opening in my thinking, oh, wow, maybe that's the future of dialogue. It's like moving into different ways of running dialogue.
Yeah, because it's come up for me quite a few times. I mean, I personally, I experience occasions where I'm mute and I can't talk. But there's a lot of autistic people that literally don't use verbal language, or a lot of the time, so yeah, that's going to be already. As I'm talking about it, my words are drying up. It's almost as though I'm putting it.
Don't worry, there's no need to worry about it.
Now we're just talking symbols, but I don't know sign language.
So you have to acknowledge that silence in a piece of dialogue is as important as the pieces when people are sharing. Totally. And if you think about the ancestral ways of sitting around the fire and sharing, Native Americans, would smoke the pipe together. There would be lots of rituals. Many, tribes would dance together around the fire. They would sing together around the fire. They would do other things than just sitting and talking.
See, this is really interesting, because the aspect that neurodiversity and the autistic culture is something that's we're having to incorporate, we're having to facilitate into society, because it is affecting everyone. Even if you don't know somebody who's autistic or anything, it's affecting the way laws are being changed all the time, government guidelines and everything. But also, like, on a energetic level, there's something particularly, I suppose, if an autistic person may be in a hyper empathic state, then that can be noticed more without them speaking. But noticed. I think what I'm trying to say is that it's a lot of it is about noticing and presence.
Yes. So paying attention.
Yeah. So say a bit about, because for me, I mean, it's going to be interesting when we're working together, because we're both coming from different backgrounds and quite different approaches in some ways, and I'm almost a little bit afraid of what you're going to be bringing. We're going to get us up doing body sculpting and stuff on day one. That could land me in hot water.
No, I don't think so.
No, but for me, a lot of the way it's been conducted previously is like in a presence sort of way, an existential sort of way, and sometimes I've found that there could be, other things, if presented properly, could be a little bit more structure or something. How? Yeah.
Well, I think it's what I've always, as a facilitator in general, whether you're doing dialogue, facilitation or other, is to create a loose framework, a loose structure whereby people can feel free but safe. If you have some form of, it's like what's the analogy that I can think of? It's very much like scaffolding around the building, and we're going to build that building together, but we have put some scaffold around it, so we feel safe, that we know whatever we build in, we're not going to fall off because we've got the scaffold.
And we're all together.
And we are together, indeed. We are in the same, there's the analogy of the container. We often talked about creating a safe container for people to be and share, authentically. But container sounds like a pot, like a very solid thing to be within. I like to think of a loose structure with lots of holes in that thing, where air can flow through,
That's nice.
Where there's energy, going round, but that where you feel supported, that you feel contained enough in that sense, but enough to feel okay, safe, and open enough to feel free, to share and suggest other things. I think what's beautiful in the dialogue process is to be able to see what's emerging, so to allow people, to enable that emergent process from people to be able to to say, hey, why don't we doodle now? Or why I'd love to have some color pens, because everyone is different. And as you say, every autistic person is different, and will have different forms of preferred expression in that sense, like most people, though, you know. So it's to be able to respond to what's needed. That's the key thing for me.
Yeah. I suppose when you said if someone comes out with a suggestion that might be a little bit random, there's a sense in me that I feel destabilized, because does that mean that somebody can say, hey, let's doodle now in the middle? But it's not like that, is it? It would be in the flow of the...
Yes, because then you'll either get some people say, oh, wouldn't that be nice if we did, and then you'll see through the circle whether it's like most of them just 2, just 3, you know, or a lot of them need to think about it, so maybe for next time.
Yeah,
you know?
or somebody says, oh, they might all look at that person and go, that was a bit random, and that person will go, actually, yeah, it was a bit random, wasn't it? Yeah, you know.
So Johnny, I don't believe things in being random. Whatever people share, to me, there's nothing ever random in the sharing within a dialogue circle. It's cool. whatever is needed, whatever I need to say, and I'm not quite sure why I'm saying it, because it's authentic. So if it's authentic, it's not going to be rationalized, it's not going to be controlled necessarily, it's not going to be planned or scheduled, you know. It's going to come out and I think, I'm not quite sure why I'm talking about this. That's the pearls for me.
Do you know, I'm really looking forward to it, because it was quite a lot of work at convening the sessions mostly on my own last year. And so it's going to be nice, because I feel like there's going to be a little bit of holding for me, you know, and I feel like my time's come that you know, if you're up for that.
Yes, absolutely. That's why I'm coming.
Holding space,
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. We're going to wrap up in a few minutes. I did have a couple more questions, but I just wanted to say, as you were talking then about the scaffolding, with the way things flow through, and that relates to the etymology of the word dialogue, and you know, the way words flow through and in between.
Yes.
And meaning making is occurring all the time. But I had a vision of the dream machine, you know, dream machine. Yeah, it's something that came out of, I think, Brian Geising and William Burroughs era in the like 70s, 60s, and it's like if you look on YouTube, it's like a tower like that, and it's a beautiful design with these slits in it, and you put it on a record turntable with a bulb inside.
Okay.
And it spins. And you stare at it, and it supposedly induces like a trance state, but it's what can happen inside that, in that container. Anyway, maybe that's maybe a new company called Dream Machine Dialogue or something. Great. So it's been very, very rich. Loads. Maybe we could have another session at some point in the future.
Sure. Maybe we should do it once we've gone into the program and see what's happened.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah, good. Okay, I've got one. Nothing random. If you could send a message to yourself 10 years ago, what would you tell the younger Caroline?
I know you did send me the list yesterday, and that's the question that I stumbled on, really. I was thinking, oh my God, no, because I usually take people through the process of taking them when they're 74, like, you know, 20, 30 years later or more, you know, in their life. That's a tool I use, you know, visioning tool.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, he's taking me back there. You know, it's like, that's not something I've even kind of thought about before. And I did go back 10 years ago, and I think the key word that came to my mind is trust. And I think it's trust your inner knowing, trust your heart, you know, trust what you hear within, you know, that you know you need to do. I mean, you know, why I got involved with the film Down to Earth was that mostly the film is all about this. It's about being connected to our inner wisdom, to our inner voice. You know, if we have all the answers that we seek outside, within. So if we just allowed ourselves to keep connected, you know, to that inner knowing. And I think 10 years ago, I was hearing my inner voice, and I was starting to listen to it. So 10 years ago, say just trust. And obviously that creates a lot of anxiety, because once you start listening to your true self, then it often triggers changes in your life that are not always welcome by other people, or even by yourself, by parts of who you are still. So it's change, transformation, transitions, we talk about them in all sorts of different ways these days, are challenging, and a lot of people don't want to face change, although it's happening all the time. It's just kind of a lot of people in denial of the change that needs to happen, or they don't want to hear the voice within that's telling them what they need to be doing. So I guess 10 years ago, I just said, just trust that voice, don't worry.
That's really awesome, thanks.
That's all right. You're most welcome, Johnny.
Okay, so if it's okay, we can wrap it up now. Is there anything you want to say?
Thank you for the opportunity.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you for coming on. Okay, see you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.